little while ago, I found a book. It's not the one I'm going to be talking about today, but I found a book about Dionysus. And I thought it was really good. It was really helpful. And it was really interesting because the author actually started from a very different assumption, very different starting point than most people do when they are talking about this topic. He was starting with the assumption that Dionysus and that the gods are real, that the gods are absolutely real. That's where you should start when you look into the past. That it's not enough to just try to write it off in a mechanistic or utilitarian way, the reality of the gods, but that even if they don't exist, that you should start with the supposition that they do. And I thought that was really brilliant, because even if the gods did not actually exist, I think there's really good reason and evidence to show that they actually do, at the very least, phenomenologically exist. So if you've heard of this idea called phenomenalism, or Heidegger, phenomena, I forget how you say it, anyway, that even if you could show that the gods don't exist, still and nonetheless the phenomenon of the gods do exist. It is a very real thing. And that author of that book, I'll link to it below, that author of that book said basically that these gods are by no means gone, that they still remain in us. And then, of course, that segues to the video I made yesterday about the Germans still having Odin and Wotan deep down in their soul, of which Nietzsche's sister Elizabeth was so exemplary. She was a perfect example of that phenomenon. Having the gods in deep down inside of you, but being unable to acknowledge that, and how they were at odds with the Christianity that the Germans took on. Anyway, that all these gods are still a very real thing, even if you could show, and you can't, but even if you could show that the gods don't absolutely exist, the phenomenon of the gods exist, and they're still pointing towards something. This is why, this is the inherent danger of modern atheism or secularism. This is the inherent danger of, by the way, which historians like Tom Holland would show that this is a Christian phenomenon. Because very interestingly, in the early days of the spread of Christianity, the early Christians were actually called atheists. A lot of people don't know that, but that the early Christians, the apostles, they were called atheists by a lot of people, not because they actually believed in no gods, but because they got rid of all the other gods except for one. And so this vast reduction in the pantheon of gods, whether in sky gods or earth gods or whatever, gods in the trees, the banishing of all those gods led people to call them atheists. And so it's ironic that modern people call themselves atheists or secularists or whatever, and they don't see how when they do that, they're actually being very Christian. They're following the trend line of Christianity. And so when an atheist says that they just get rid of the one more God than the Christians do, or the Jews do, or Muslims, or whatever, that much is true. But what the atheist is tone deaf to is how in doing that, they are, in doing that very thing, they are actually just following the trend line that Christianity has already set up. So they're being very Christian in that sense. And so that's why, although in some places Nietzsche did call himself an atheist, or in Zarathustra he was called godless, and then he just embraced that accusation. He said, yes, I am Zarathustra the godless. It wasn't godless from a true metaphysical, from a true heart place, The Zarathustra that I encounter in Thus Spoke Zarathustra is a character that understands that the gods are so much more than just the question of if they exist. It's what they represent. And so it's what they represent, their values, their ideals, but also, particularly in the case of Dionysus, what people experience. So now that I've said all that, I wanted to set the groundwork here for a discussion of this book, which I found at a thrift store for like $2.50. It was awesome. The God of Ecstasy, Sex Roles, and the Madness of Dionysus. Now, don't read that wrong. It's not sex roles in the sense of sex positions. It's not like, I'm not talking about actual, like the sex act. It's talking about gender roles. It really should say gender roles and the madness of Dionysus. So, the what we would call patriarchy. Now I've been very sympathetic over the years to the right wing, the right wing. Been very sympathetic to them in how they point out the madness of the left, and how the modern left, the modern woke left, has become a very ugly thing in our day. I've been very sympathetic with that. But lately, over the past while, although I still maintain that the left in our world has completely lost its mind, I interestingly, my focus has actually shifted away from that to where now the real people that I now have a deeper, in some ways, mistrust of is the people on the right. People talk now about the woke right. And it's interesting, though, that I think the extremes of the right and the extremes of the left, I've come to the conclusion now that they actually feed off of each other, that they need each other. So it's not just that the left has gone mad, which they have, but that the extremes on the right feed those on the left. And so to illustrate this, I need to tell you a quick story. I grew up with a friend who I still greatly appreciate having grown up with that friend. We had great times together. He was a childhood friend. Well, I met him in my youth, actually, and we were friends for a couple decades. Really close friends. Brilliant guy in so many ways. Very talented. And very talented guy. I miss him a lot still to this day. But this friend, interestingly, would eventually, in adulthood, contrary to our day where a lot of young people are coming out trans or gender fluid or whatever, this friend he eventually came out trans, gender fluid or whatever, as an adult when we were in our 20s. And at first I was very confused, but oops, hey, lie down. But at the time I was confused, but I was also at the time, interestingly, this was just when Jordan Peterson was coming out, right? Jordan Peterson, sorry about the noise here. Jordan Peterson was just coming out, and I was at that time very concerned about the madness of the left and the slide into craziness, which that concern has proven itself to be legitimate for sure. But hey, lie down. That concern has proven itself to be very legitimate. But interestingly, the concern about the irrationality of that position, like whether, a longtime friend all of a sudden comes out trans or gender fluid or whatever, and then they want to, so this friend that you've had for literally for decades, who was, you refer to him as a guy, all of a sudden this friend wants you to refer to him as a her, as a she. And of course, at that time, I was concerned just with the rationality of it. You know what I mean? Just the complete being rational about it. And obviously, I would focus on, I was getting caught up with the right wing at that time that focused on the madness of that. And so, because that's where my focus was, and I was trying to stay rational, I'm like, this is ridiculous. What are you even talking about? I pushed back hard on it because it was ridiculous. And we had a very bitter falling out because I viewed what he was doing at that time was extremely irrational. And lo and behold, I think it was, in a sense, technically, logically, it was irrational. But lo and behold, that there was a dynamic going on underneath the surface that I had an intuition of at that time. But I wish I could have understood it and explained it to myself better at that time than I can now. Because I would have, if I had understood it, I would not have focused on the irrationality of that, what he was saying. I might have been able to save the friendship, but which would have been great. But if also too, though, I would have been able to see what was underneath the surface. There was something important that was going on underneath the surface for him, and even for me. And but he himself could not understand it. He couldn't see it. Like most people who get caught up in the trans gender fluid thing, they can't see what's really motivating them underneath. And I couldn't see what was really motivating them underneath. And I couldn't see, actually, that there was a dynamic going on in him that, maybe to a lesser degree, but was still there, that was going on in me. And so, instead of being able to understand that and explore that with him, I was taking a sort of rationalist, sort of Jordan Peterson. I was, periodically getting into right-wingers like, the popular ones like Ben Shapiro, Steven Crowder, blah, 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 right? And so I'd be like, oh yeah, that's crazy. Of course, though, this dynamic that was going underneath I couldn't see, and I've only been able to see much more clearly in the last year, particularly in the last month or two. It's been really clear after finding this book. So, before I get into this book, of course, there are some things I should say ahead of time with the gender fluid thing. There are dynamics going on that are just purely environmental that are severely exacerbating this problem. So, our food supply, for instance, is just garbage. It's just really garbage. That's something I could get into, but things we eat, the ultra-processed foods, that's making everything worse. It's lowering people's testosterone. There are other nutritional deficiencies, vitamin D, omega-3, all these things, when they're at their proper levels, interacting with each other properly, your testosterone levels are up to where they should be, and when you don't have those things, they fall. So those things are definitely exacerbating the fundamental gender dysphoria, which is a real condition that I have compassion for, which I'll get into more. So those things are definitely great exacerbators of this problem. But they are not, I would maintain now, the main cause of this societal-wide problem, which is happening in the context of what Nietzsche predicted, which is this great wave of nihilism and the general decay of society, which Nietzsche saw as absolutely inevitable. But there is something that Nietzsche also said that directly relates to this issue of trans, gender fluid, gender dysphoria, etc. And it is an inevitability when things become, let's say, for lack of a better word, too patriarchal. I'm not being anti-patriarchal, but I do think there is such a thing as patriarchal, in the sense that you can't have a functioning society without strong men. And the truth about women is that as much as they say that they like men to express their true feelings, really the majority of them don't. Really they don't. Or if they do, just to do it a little bit. And so the ideal thing for a modern man is to be tough and strong and not to express too many feelings, to hold things inside of you. That's a good thing. It's a necessary thing for navigating the world. But what happens is when men do this, they never actually take a break from that persona, from that ethos. They never take a break from it. When in reality, the ideal thing is to be tough and strong, be a hard ass for a lot of the time, but every once in a while, maybe it's once a year, maybe it's once every 6 months, maybe it's once every 2 years, I would hope at the absolute most, but every once in a while, in order to be able to maintain this strong ethos without it killing you, You have to just be able to bawl every once in a while, to be able to cry like a baby and just let everything out. Definitely not in front of the world to see. Because as much as people say, like I said, that they want you to be, express your true self, really they don't. They're bullshitting. They're only half truth, and they're not aware of what they really mean when they say that. Because there's a part of them that does, particularly with women, there's a part of them that wants the man to be, empathetic and loving and kind. But there's definitely a huge part of them that will disrespect the man when he does actually do that. And the modern women don't have consciousness of that. So modern women typically don't have consciousness of how they respond to men when men actually do what they say. So women can't really give honest, true advice about how they want men to be. And so the manly advice, to be stoic, to be strong, is actually good advice. And women do generally love that. The problem is when men are too hard-assed for too long, they become emotionally constipated. Hard inside, they become too dark, and it actually seeps into their identity, and they forgot about their childlike side, their loving side, their happy, smiley side. Every man has that inside. And Nietzsche said that, what did he say? True adulthood, true maturity is the man finding seriousness in play as he was when he was a child. So you go through that process. Like in Zarathustra, the stages, a child to camel to lion and then back to child again, right? There's this process that a man, the problem is along the way, men become the hard ass, the camel, the hard ass, they take on these loads, but they don't ever get out of that. And this is where Dionysus comes in. And then this is interesting because Nietzsche called himself the last disciple of Dionysus. And he said, he pointed out, what was it, the Antichrist or one of those books, he says the ultimate antipathy in his mind was Dionysus versus the crucified. That was the ultimate antipathy. Now this is extremely interesting because who is Dionysus? Well, there's different manifestations of Dionysus throughout history. And this guy, brilliantly. By the way, the author, Arthur Evans, very ironically, from the 80s, roughly, I think when he wrote this, at the time, he was, I think he's passed now, but he was actually a gay feminist. Now, that's incredibly interesting. To be a gay feminist in the 80s was obviously is very different than being a gay feminist in the 2020s. It's like a different planet almost. And so it doesn't throw me off to read something from someone who would take on that title from the 80s, as much as it would throw me off if someone said that now. Because if someone said that now, there's a good chance that they're into all the ideological stuff. Anyway, I won't get too far into that. But, so his overarching case, his overarching point is that we have lost the madness, the vital madness, the vitality of Dionysus due to the prevalence of, quote, the patriarchy, or more specifically, the patriarchal religions and patriarchal societies like Rome. Now, interestingly, he would disagree with Nietzsche a bit, and Nietzsche would disagree with him. Nietzsche looked back to Rome longingly, being like, man, this was an ideal thing. And for Nietzsche, Christianity is what ruined Rome, the greatness of Rome. Christianity ruined it. But for this guy, Arthur Evans, that's not the case. For him, Christianity in Rome, interestingly, well, that is the case, but it's not. It's more complicated. And so Arthur Evans would say both Christianity and Rome are very patriarchal, but in a different sense. And you'd have to read it to get into his... And by the way, I don't agree with absolutely everything he says, but it's a very fascinating take on things. Ultimately, he's saying that Christianity was born out of this matrix in the first century, I think, of what we would call Hellenism, which was a fusion of different things. Judaism, the philosophers like Plato, other things coming together, and Christianity was born out of it. But his contention is that Christianity and the Christ of Christianity that came, that was declared by Paul long after Jesus was no longer on the scene, was actually an unconscious expression of multiple floating and interacting dynamics that had to do with Dionysus. But the original Dionysus was a god of ecstasy, a god of wildness, a god of madness. If you can imagine people getting together and having a big bonfire and then dancing around the fire half naked and screaming and chanting and losing their minds, if you can imagine something like that, you can start to appreciate the religious ecstasy and rituals of this god Dionysus. You can just start to appreciate it. And it's very interesting because I have been a long time metalhead. I'm big into heavy metal. I love it. I also am very much a softie. I love ballads. I've written ballads. I love beautiful soft music. I love operas. I love folk music. I love we were listening the other day to some beautiful Celtic music, just beautiful, soft, lovely. I love Christian hymns. I love Christmas carols. I also love metal Christmas carols. I'm very, you could say, schizophrenic in a sense. And what I realized about myself is that actually I am a bit of a metal, I am a bit of a Dionysus person myself in these vast opposing sort of schizophrenic music tastes. Like if you were to see my when I had Spotify, you'd look through the different things. I'd probably be the hardest person to classify because I'm so schizophrenic that I would love the beauty of even a Christian hymn, and then love the what I would consider to be beauty of raging music that takes these most extreme emotions and beautifully juxtaposes things, packages them together to create a crescendo. Just love that. This is where this has always been me. You know, I've realized lately that I am very much a Dionysian with a lot of Christian roots. I'm a Dionysian in my love of heavy metal, in my love of ecstasy, the ecstatic. Now, interestingly, the original Dionysian rites, or many of the Dionysian rites, they were ecstatic. They were often orgiastic. So there would be like sex going on. But it wasn't, interestingly, now I've never been involved in any orgiastic thing like that, that's for sure. And I'm not really interested in it. But I can kind of start to understand it as opposed to modern liberalism, as opposed to modern hippieism, the free love, just let it all hang out, which I would consider a sort of degenerate thing. I would say the Dionysian rites, the Dionysian rituals, were, in contrast to that, very different. Very, very different. They weren't degenerate in the sense that even though the sex element was there, it was like packaged in the context of ritual and ascending ecstasy, rather than just a degenerate and vulgar orgy. It was turned into a religious ritual, an ecstatic, ever-increasing ritual. And although I definitely have never been into the orgiastic part, there is an aspect of the ecstatic stuff which is in heavy metal. I've always loved the ecstatic, ever-increasing metal songs that express rage, love, power, passion, hatred, all of it. The whole gamut of human emotions that expresses all of it. A lot of heavy metal bands do this, and I've always loved them for that. I just didn't know that in getting into that, I was expressing a Dionysian worship, Dionysian ecstasy. And then a while ago, I discovered this article called, lo and behold, Dionysus in the Mosh Pit, which was, I'll put a link to that below, Dionysus in the Mosh Pit, which is basically that thesis, that heavy metal itself, the whole thing of heavy metal, is one big musical orgy of Dionysus. And so this is really interesting. So I discovered I already, to some degree, am a Dionysian. I discovered that. Now, growing up, I was in a metal band. I was a metal lead singer. I'm still proud of some of the songs we made, even though they could be recorded better. I still love metal. I still love the songs we made. Even as tormented as I was back then, with unanswered questions, and my God, it was bad. But anyway, this friend that I had a falling out with, I remember when we played music together, he would sometimes have nail polish on and some feminine things about him. Now at the time, you know, simplistically, naively, I just thought, oh, that's just an emo thing. Turns out, no. It was a Dionysian thing that was going on with him. And I didn't see it at the time. It was also a Dionysian thing going on inside of me. And so the fundamental struggle was Christ versus Dionysus. It was good. I was the battleground of these opposing gods. That was the battleground. And man, did that ever mess me up. And so when Christians, interestingly, try to have Christian metal, Christian rock, which is a category, I think they're trying to bring to peace these two opposing things, especially Christian heavy metal. And there's some really great Christian hardcore rock metal. You know, Demon Hunter comes to mind, such a fantastic band. Then there's the more classic Christian bands like Living Sacrifice. But there's also even much heavier modern Christian bands. But I think by being that, what they're trying to hold a tension between Christ and Dionysus. And it's ironic that Nietzsche saw this tension. And he saw it's Christ versus Dionysus, and Nietzsche's like, Dionysus has to win. And Nietzsche's like, we have to get back to this original ethos. And he saw it in his own people, as I discussed in the video the other day that I posted, that for the Germans, Christianity was a black box. But for him, it was right in front of him. The Christ versus Dionysus was right there. What Christianity wanted to do is it wanted to take these natural human emotions. So Dionysus was an attempt at expressing all the gamut of human emotions: rage, lust, hatred, love, compassion, all those different things. Dionysus wanted to give expression to all of those things in a controlled, ritualistic, religious context without condemning them as evil, right? That's what Dionysus was an attempt to do. And so if you were in a patriarchal society like Rome, like Persia, where you literally need to be a hard ass and have a hard ass military, or else those guys over there will come and fuck you up and take everything away, and where you literally need to do that. Dionysus was a sort of purging of all the other things inside of you. Like Carl Jung talked about the anima and the animus, we all have a male side and a feminine side, right? So the expression, the religious rites to worship of Dionysus would be an expression of all this different gamut, right? And so what happens in society is that, what happened is back then, Christianity took over. And instead of saying we want to give expression to this dark side, Christianity said we want to banish the dark side and call it evil. So Dionysus was an attempt to purge all the inner emotions inside of you, to purge it out in a healthier way. Of course, the rituals could turn into craziness where even they would rip animals apart. But the point that even then, even though that's terrible, it was an attempt to release the full gamut of human emotions out, just as heavy metal is, in a controlled setting where society doesn't break down. So you could be a hard-ass Roman soldier, then get involved in the rites of Dionysus, let everything out, and then give expression to it, and then feel good that you've given expression to everything, and then go back to being a hard-ass Roman soldier so you could defend society so everything doesn't break down. But what happens is people rightly became hard-ass soldiers, rightly, because society needs that. But then they forgot about the other parts of them. They forgot about the anima versus animus, the female side in them. They forgot about the compassionate, loving side, the bitter, the lusty side, all the different things, like even the petty emotions, and then the non-petty emotions, just the basic emotions, the basic urges. They forgot about those, And so, but those things inside of them, they didn't go away just because you forgot about them. They stagnate. They putrefy inside of you, right? And so what happens is a lot of badass dudes who are tough, and women appreciate that. They do appreciate that, even though women won't admit it. Even though even though men needed to be like that, they also needed to take a time, like once in a while, once every 6 months, once every year, where they would just let it all out in some sort of orgiastic, And so anyway, interestingly, I've always done this for like the last 20 years. I don't think you guys have seen it in any of my videos, but I love to act. I like to be silly, even though I focused on very serious topics. But I had a falling out with my friend because he became out trans or bi or whatever, gender dysphoric or whatever. But then I realized that in a sense, I've always given some expression to the female side of myself as well, usually in the form of a joke. So, back in the day, we had these, not so much these days it seems, but gay people, sometimes some gay people, we would call them flamers, and I like to take on that persona among other personas. I like to act, so I would, talk like this, and I'd be like, oh my god, you're so silly. I like to do that. I like to be silly. Even though my channel is focused on very serious things, I actually have a stellar sense of humor and I love to laugh all the time. But I love to just, be silly sometimes and just let it all out. But then if I do that too much, I'm kind of sick of it and I want to go back to being serious again. But I need to let it out sometimes. I need to just be silly. Like ridiculously silly. Put on a wig, walk around half naked, drink wine, whatever, be stupid, right? But someone looking on in our modern society, or particularly on the conservative side of society, whether religious or irreligious, would look at that and say, oh my god, he's effeminate, he's this, he's that, oh my god. Right? They would think that. When in reality, the truth is, I am not that thing in isolation, I'm just giving expression to it. And in a sense, sort of purging it. And then by doing so, respecting myself. And the state that I've been in that give rises to those things. So when my former friend who would wear nail polish or whatever, he was giving expression to that feminine side, which his patriarchal small town in which we grew up in would tend to condemn if they saw it. The problem is, and this is where I'm getting to the point, the problem is when the patriarchal, whatever, conservative, whatever society suppresses it too long, doesn't allow you to give expression to that, all the wide aspects of you, and only demands of you being strong, conservative, masculine all the time. If not that person that they're demanding it of it, at least their kids, somewhere along the way, someone's going to come out and then swing to the opposite side. Because along the way, they weren't giving proper expression, proper validation to the whole gamut of human emotions, anima and animus, like Carl Jung talked about. And so, and Rome itself, and he talks about that in here, Rome itself did not want to give the hard-ass soldiers the freedom to periodically, engage in a Dionysian rite. They would view it as a threat to society. Now, they were right in the sense that if everyone was doing that all the time, it would be a threat to society. Because if you're doing that all the time, I mean, that's going to be a big problem. Because society needs you to be tough. If you're a Roman soldier, you need to be tough. Rome worked because they had a brutally tough army. Like Rome, that's the whole reason Rome worked. And so if you knock that down, but the problem is, but if you're a hard ass all the time, society is gonna be destroyed. Also, you have to have rites and rituals where you give expression to your whole gamut of who you are, the whole gamut. And if you don't, those things that are not given expression will stagnate, they'll putrefy, they'll turn into something really, really nasty. And I think that's a big reason why society now, you probably heard about on the news, Elon Musk talking about, the grooming gangs in England. Of course, that's a huge problem, of course. But it's a little bit late and a little bit dishonest, because England, hello, have you never heard of Jimmy Savile? Yeah, I mean, they've had a bit of a problem for a long time. They've been grooming for a long time with the white people. So even though they're bringing in other cultures, which may be indeed abusing kids at a higher level than the white people were, maybe, but there's still been this massive, long history of what was going on. And I think people now are getting to a point where they're grooming kids, because they've been living in a society which didn't give respect to the expression of the full gamut of the emotions. So when a person gets to a point that they're doing terrible things, it's because they've stagnated inside. They've stagnated. They didn't, and now it's just turned into this ugly mess. And anyway, coming full circle to what I was going to say, when someone comes out trans, when someone comes out gender dysphoric, gender fluid, whatever, it's not so much about what they're saying. It's about what they're saying, what it means. Which is that when you come out and you say you're trans, when you say this, you're actually just trying to finally throw off this oppressive background culture that didn't give proper expression and purging of all, and celebrating of all those different emotions which are naturally inside of you. When for so long, so that in that sense, the people on the conservative end, when they condemn anything effeminate, when they condemn it, they actually drive it deeper underground, and at some point later on, because they did that without giving proper expression to it, later we're going to have this problem of people coming out trans, people coming out whatever. But when you actually come out and define yourself by those emotions, that's a real problem, because you're really stagnating at that point. When you're defining yourself by it, and you say, I am gender fluid. The truth is no one is actually, in an absolute sense, gender fluid as a new category. The truth is we are all gender fluid in the sense of anima and animus that Carl Jung talked about. That's where the real fluid is. That's in all of us. That was even in me, and that's why I like to act silly sometimes. And so by acting silly like that, I was giving expression to the same dynamic that was in me. But I couldn't put it in words and express this is why I was doing it. And so I didn't feel the need to come out trans or whatever later, because I regularly gave expression to it, to the point where I felt like I didn't need to anymore. It was sort of a purging, sort of almost an exorcism, but exorcism would again imply that that was a really bad thing, when I don't think it was. So Christianity took all those dynamics and said that's evil, that's bad, believe in Jesus, and just cut off those things from their source and go to Jesus. But that was a replacement of Dionysus, who, in the extremely harsh and patriarchal world in which Dionysus and Christianity was born and lived, it was an expression to the female side that the patriarchal side of society had to suppress to various degrees for the sake of societal stability. But when you suppressed it too much, it stagnates, and when it stagnates, it comes out as trans. When in reality, it's unexpressed. So trans is essentially unexpressed, unprocessed, not validating the gamut of emotions. And so you're trying to come out trans, you're trying to validate it, but that's quite paradoxically, when you come out that way, you think you're validating it, but you're actually invalidating it. Because as you come out that way, you're not acknowledging the part of you that is all those things. In truth, we are all patriarchal, and we are all matriarchal, and we are all loving, and we are all hateful, and we are human. We, unlike other animals, we have an internal complex of contrary emotions, contrary feelings at one time. More than all other animals, we can feel antagonisms and oppositions internally more than anyone else. And so when you don't give expression to that, it stagnates. And I guess that's what I'm saying. the whole LGBT trans movement is a stagnation of the fundamental animus inside of us that has always needed to be given expression, which Dionysus, the god of ecstasy, was trying to give expression to. And so, quite interestingly, quite paradoxically maybe, in the same way that I think now Nietzsche was trying to prevent the Holocaust from happening by helping Germans reconnect with who their real God was inside, who their real God was, so as to stop resentment again and scapegoating. So also, Nietzsche was trying to prevent, he almost saw, in his worship of Dionysus, he saw a stagnation coming in the future, a dark degeneration coming. And that's why he tried to, for all of humanity, to elucidate the fundamental, the fundamental contradiction, which was between Christ and Dionysus. Really, you could say, in some senses, the real fundamental antagonism, especially in light of our modern trans movement, the real fundamental antagonism is excessive patriarchalism leading to a suppressed, leading to the over-suppression of the entire gamut of the human condition, of the human emotions, leading to an over-repression of those things. And when they don't come out properly, when they're not respected, given proper expression, they stagnate. And then people, in exasperation, abandon the need to be tough and strong, and then come out gender dysphoric, whatever. And so, quite paradoxically, Nietzsche's love was to point this out, so that we don't get to the situation where we are now. That was his love, to acknowledge this reality. And that's why he called himself the last initiate or worshiper of Dionysus. Anyway, if you've come with me this far, I hope this has made some sense. Some more good videos to come. My dog's here waiting in the background for me to finish this. I'm trying to think. I think that covers most of it. I encourage you to check out this book, The God of Ecstasy. Although, again, I disagree actually with some of the things that he says in here. Particularly, it's not rounded out after you read people like Tom Holland and you understand the honor shame culture that Christianity was born in, and how the cross was actually the most shameful of deaths. It rounds out this picture a lot more, so you need to take Tom Holland's Dominion and combine it with this, and then the picture starts to come together. But I'm so glad I found this book, even though it was written in the 80s. I'm so glad I found it after I discovered Tom Holland's book, because now it's so beautiful, it comes together. Anyway, I'm losing my voice. Sorry for talking your ear off. Let me know what you think. I'm quite curious. Cheers.